One of my favorite things during this 50th anniversary year has been these special Shabbatot, these opportunities to come together and hear firsthand testimonials from Beth Amers about their experiences of our 5 pillars, our 5 core values. We've heard from people talking about makom, our rootedness in place here in this historic building, in this historic Jewish neighborhood, in this majority Black and diverse neighborhood, in West Baltimore and Baltimore City. We heard beautiful stories about what that means to our congregants and what it's meant over the years. We heard powerful testimonials about Amcha, our commitment to the fullness of our Jewish people, to diversity, and how it manifests in all kinds of different ways. In fall, coming toward the Chagim, we'll hear on 2 more core values of our community, Kihila, the value of community, and finally on limud, on learning. But today, our focus is on tzedek, on justice. And while no value is necessarily more important to God or to our tradition, all of these values and so many more intersect. The value of justice, of tzedek, of mishpat, it shows up again and again in this book that we just put away. We're supposed to remember the widow, the orphan, the stranger. We're supposed to organize our societies around the principle of tzedek, of justice, ensuring that everyone has exactly as much as they need, and those who have more need to be more attentive to those who have less. When I came to Beth Am in 2010, I did not find a congregation uncommitted to justice. And the work that we've done together this past decade and a half on thinking maybe differently about what it means to be in, for, and of this community was very much built on the foundation of those who ensured that our attention to our place here in this historic neighborhood is in fact tied to our core values and our core activities. And so today you'll hear stories about tzedek, about justice. We'll hear from 3 individuals. As with these other special Shabbatot, these are not meant to be exhaustive. So there are other people, including a number of people in this room, who have been deeply involved in our justice, our social justice, and our social action work over the years. But these 3 people will share some of their stories about what this work has meant to them. First, we'll hear from Don Akchin. Then we'll hear from Jackie Oldham. And finally, we'll hear from Evan Serpick. Don, the floor is yours.
At the time that Beth Am was founded in 1974, Baltimore was feeling a surge of optimism about city living and city neighborhoods. Though Reservoir Hill had not been a Jewish neighborhood for some time, the neighborhood's stately townhouses on Utah as well as on Park were attracting eager renovators, and there was talk that Reservoir Hill might follow in the footsteps of other city neighborhoods such as Bolton Hill. But 15 years later, things had changed dramatically. Crack cocaine was flooding the inner city. In Reservoir Hill, there were robberies, car thefts, shootings. Beth Am congregants were reluctant to attend services or other events after dark, and more than one congregant was mugged in daylight hours. Members of the Beth Am board were actually floating the idea that the congregation might need to abandon our building and move to the suburbs. And that kind of talk worried Gil Sandler, who was synagogue president. Many of you know Gil Sandler as a world-class storyteller. What is less well known is that Gil Sandler was also a world-class worrier. And in 1992, he pushed the idea of forming a committee to see what could be done about the situation in Reservoir Hill. The Social Action Committee, as it was called, was charged with figuring out what Beth Am could do to enhance the neighborhood. The first committee, which I chaired, was a ragtag group of about a dozen well-meaning amateurs. We started out by learning more about the neighborhood, who were the key players, what were the community assets, what was working, what was not working. We fanned out to do some investigating and came back with lots and lots of ideas. There was one social action activity that preceded the formation of the committee. Jerry Gerard, a congregant in his 80s, was organizing synagogue volunteers to serve meals once a month at Paul's Place, a South Baltimore soup kitchen. We folded that effort into the committee's work. With that one exception, every other activity revolved around this neighborhood. One thing that we did get right from the start: we knew we were not experts on the neighborhood or on what residents needed. We agreed that the best way to build positive relationships between congregants and residents was not to tell residents what they needed to do or how to do it. That had been a problem for Black-Jewish relationships for some time in other cities. Instead, we would try to understand what residents wanted and work as their partners to help them attain them. Bertie Hack, a retired teacher, brought a small corps of volunteers to John Eager Howard Elementary School, now Dorothy I. Height, to work one-on-one with students who needed help learning to read. Soon we added a book drive, raising enough money to give every student in the school a book of their own. That effort began a partnership with the school that continues to this day under the direction of Jackie Donowitz. We learned about the Reservoir Hill Improvement Council, RHIC, which was an umbrella group bringing a number of smaller block clubs together to speak with one voice. We joined RHIC on Betham's behalf, attending monthly meetings. We became more familiar with the community's concerns. We began a partnership that has lasted more than 30 years, and in time, it translated into several events for congregants and residents. The first, sometime in 1995 or 1996, was an afternoon of prayer and song held in the sanctuary and featuring a church choir, a thrilling solo rendition of Go Down Moses, and words of faith and friendship by Rabbi Ira Schiffer and ministers of two neighborhood churches. One of those ministers was Reverend Curtis Jones, a pastor of Madison Avenue Presbyterian. He was invited to give a Shabbat morning sermon, and his dynamic preaching style was unlike anything ever heard at Betham before or since. At the time, a search committee was looking for a new rabbi, and at the conclusion of Reverend Jones's sermon, I heard one search committee member whisper to another, "Maybe we've been looking to the wrong seminaries." We held the first Interfaith Seder at Betham, inviting neighborhood residents to join us. It was quite successful, with 60 participants fairly evenly divided between congregants and residents. We invited congregants and residents to a program called Reservoir Hill Then and Now. Buzzy Hedelman, David Cordish, and Betty Seidel, among others, reminisced about growing up in the neighborhood, attending shul, attending School 61, same school, and going to the butcher, the baker, and the movie theater on Whitelock Street. Interestingly, a resident recalled that her family too, who lived on Madison Avenue, had also visited the kosher butcher on Whitelock, choosing to shop late on Friday afternoons when the prices were slashed because fresh meat couldn't be sold on Shabbat. One of my greatest personal achievements was convincing a returning Peace Corps volunteer named Sally Scott that community building experiences in West Africa would be quite useful for community building efforts in West Baltimore. Sally also used her knowledge of the Baltimore philanthropic community to help secure multi-year grants for RHIC, which allowed them to hire their first employee, a community organizer. Sally, along with Miriam Tillman, would later lead the committee in new directions, including the formation of Lakeside Neighbors Coalition, which introduced Betham to the amazing Miss Juanita Garrison. Beyond our external focus on helping the neighborhood thrive, the early Social Action Committee had two internal goals. One was to encourage congregants to get to know residents as individuals. As congregants and residents recognized each other not as strange black people or strange white people, the better we would be able to see each other in friendship rather than in fear. The second goal was to expand the committee's work beyond the efforts of 12 individuals to make Betham's presence in Reservoir Hill a central element of the synagogue's unique identity. And that goal, I am happy to say, has been achieved. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. First, I want to get your involvement. Raise your hand if you are a native of Baltimore. Quite a few of you are, and quite a few of you aren't. Which leads me to my story. What justice and Betham mean to me. I am a stranger in a strange land. Exodus 2:22. As an African-American native of Baltimore and the product of 2 centuries of known ancestors in Maryland, I have not only felt the truth of the statement of the exile, but it has driven me to seek justice my entire life. My family, especially my mother's family, taught me that the Jewish community of Baltimore could be counted upon as allies in the pursuit of justice. As a child living in the segregated West Baltimore neighborhoods of Upton and Sandtown, Winchester, I often saw my grandparents and others buying groceries, clothes, insurance policies, and other necessities from Jewish merchants, many of whom lived in our neighborhoods. These relationships went beyond the mercantile and extended to mutual respect and friendship. We strangers looked out for each other. Side note, as children, my aunt and uncle were playmates of Arnold Weiner, lawyer and father of Deborah Weiner, the newscaster. Shifting gears a little. Baltimore is both famous and infamous. One of its infamies is that it is the national cradle of covenant laws passed in the early 20th century that restricted housing availability for both African American and Jewish residents. There was a time, for instance, when Jewish people were not welcome to live in Roland Park, and African Americans were barred from living in my current neighborhood of Lauraville. It's no accident that our two communities have carved the same paths across this city toward greener pastures, from central West Baltimore to neighborhoods such as Ashburton, Park Heights, and Pikesville. Our communities have left our mark. As my family ventured into Northeast Baltimore in the early 1960s in pursuit of better housing, diversity, and space to grow, I continue to be drawn to the Jewish community as well as my own. Thus, in high school, college, and the workplace, my friendships with Jewish people also expanded. Among those friends were Ruth Potts of this congregation, Hillary Adis Jacobs, my college classmate at Goucher. So when in January 2016, My mother asked me to attend the Martin Luther King Day concert with her at Betham, featuring the Shades of Yale. I was delighted and intrigued. Neither of us had ever been inside a synagogue before, although we had often seen the throngs of congregants walking up the hill from Druid Park Lake Drive to High Holy Day services. Ironically, my mother's family and I had frequently visited her cousin, who lived just 1 block away from Betham from the 1950s to the 1990s. And who should buy my cousin's house? Our dear friend, Juanita Garrison. More about that later. As we entered the sanctuary that night, the openness, warmth, and kindness of the greeters and other congregants was a striking contrast to our perception of Jewish religious life, as opposed to our shared neighborly life, as insular and standoffish. But by the end of the evening, I no longer felt like a stranger in a strange land. I took the unusually bold step of contacting Rabbi Berg, shared with him my blog post about the concert, and then shortly thereafter, he connected me with Diane Schwartz and Don Akchin, who invited me to join IFO. I quickly learned that while IFO functioned as a community/relational justice organization, the Social Action Committee was focused on traditional Jewish Tzedek practices, such as mitzvah days and other service-oriented projects. Over the last 9 years, I have come to understand better what Tzedek, justice in action, means, and why it is one of the pillars of Betham's core values. My good friend Don Akchin has already talked about the beginning of the Social Action Committee and some of the activities that evolved into IFO activities, and our partnerships with RHIC and other organizations. So during my time in the IFO organization, we co-hosted the RHIC Community Festival, featuring the Kugel and Greens Cook-Off, the Juneteenth House and Garden Tour, anti-racism book clubs and discussion groups, and museum trips. Party at the Polls, which encourages and celebrates neighborhood voters in Reservoir Hill, has been very successful, and it is one of the joyous events that I've taken part in. But the reach of IFO extended beyond Reservoir Hill proper to all of Central West Baltimore via our partnership with No Boundaries Coalition, which builds relationship, learning, and leadership and other skills for African American residents. So now, as a veteran of 9 years with IFO and Betham, I can say that none of these partnerships and projects were easy to complete, and not all of them were successful. They required hours of work and effort, blood, sweat, and even a few tears, especially mine, as different points of view, beliefs, experiences, areas of expertise, and perspectives were shared and tested. One concept I've struggled with is tikkun olam, repair the world. My view is that regardless of whether the world is broken or not, It is everyone's responsibility to repair it equally. My focus is on the interconnectedness of our world, the ideas, people, and circumstances we share. So as I recount all my experiences with Beth Am and Reservoir Hill, there's 3 specific events that come to mind. One is the Ceasefire Baltimore Prayer Circle, which was an event in, I want to say about 2018 or 2019, where a small band of Beth Amers and community people walked up to North Avenue to participate in a citywide march and prayer event against the violence which plagues our city still. What hit me about this event was the closeness of the people from our little group. As we formed our prayer circle, we each took turns talking about what this community has meant to us, and we just shared our common bonds. Second example is at the 2018 Party at the Polls, where we celebrated the 100th birthday of Mrs. Henrietta Harrison after she had cast her vote, with cake and a few photos down in the old social hall before the renovations. Mrs. Harrison lived in the 900 block of Chauncey, but it was thanks to one of my current Lauraville neighbors, whose mother was Mrs. Harrison's best friend, I was able to recall Mrs. Harrison's name. Just goes to show you how interconnected all of us across Baltimore can be. We never know who we know. Finally, my role at Beth Am has itself transformed from a bridge between Beth Am and its community, most notably as an advocate for the African American community, to an unprecedented ad hoc associate of the synagogue. I've attended and participated in many Shabbat services, and with assistance from friends and teachers like Bonnie Steinman, I've learned to follow the order of services and to read and sing some of the Hebrew litany, which carries on with Beth Am's tradition of being in a house where interfaith values can be shared and strengthened. So what exactly is justice in general, and what is Tzedek, justice in action? I have often pointed to the openness, warmth, and kindness of congregants as an example of social and relational justice. But I guess what I really have to point to is the general definitions of justice. The quality of being just, righteousness, equitableness, or moral rightness, and giving each person what he or she deserves, or in more traditional terms, giving each person his or her due. That is the biggest gift that my Beth Am family has given me over these 9 years, and I am eternally grateful for your friendship and our familial connection. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Those are tough acts to follow. 2 of my favorite people. It's great to hear from Don and Jackie. So I came to Beth Am for the first time in 2011 on an assignment for Baltimore Magazine. Rabbi Berg had come to Beth Am in July 2010, as he mentioned, and by the time his 1-year anniversary word had gone around that this dynamic, city-oriented rabbi was bringing new members and excitement to the show. So we thought we should profile him, get to know him a little bit. To back up a second, I grew up in Pikesville, going to Chizuk Emunah. My father's family had been longtime members of Chizuk Emunah, dating back to when the congregation was located in this building. I didn't actually know that at the time, when I first came to Beth Am. In fact, my father had his bar mitzvah right here at this bima, and his yard site is this week. So this is really a particularly meaningful time for me to be here with you all. I also attended Camp Ramah in the Poconos for many years, and in high school decided I wanted to learn more about Judaism. I studied with rabbis from a range of backgrounds and decided to attend List College, a joint undergraduate program of Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. I treasured my education there, majoring in Jewish philosophy at JTS and urban studies at Columbia. But after I graduated in 1996, my connection to Jewish life faded, and I pursued a career in journalism. I met my wife Brenda and started a family. We stayed connected to Jewish life through family and holidays, but we didn't join a synagogue. And Judaism didn't feel as connected to my values and interests as it once did. Which brings us back to 2011. To report the story, I interviewed Rabbi Berg, and on a whim, while driving around this neighborhood with my family on a Saturday morning, we decided to stop in for Shabbat services. I was wearing jeans and worried that we would feel awkward or uncomfortable, but the opposite was true. We felt very welcomed. I confess that as the parent of two young boys, I particularly appreciated it when I saw young kids gathering under the bima in the old sanctuary downstairs during Musaf, generating only smiles. In our interview, Rabbi Berg told me about a rule that was passed on to him from the previous rabbi, no shushing, he said. That's the future of the Jewish community there. We also appreciated the free lunch. So after the story was published, we continued to attend services sporadically. That summer, Rabbi Berg, Rabbi Miriam, and other Beth Am members worked with the Reservoir Hill Improvement Council, which we heard about, to build a playground in nearby German Park. In 2012, Rabbi Berg was one of the leading religious voices in Maryland advocating for marriage equality. And Beth Am was just launching IFO, the innovative community partnership that expanded deep, meaningful connections between Beth Am and its neighbors. I was working for Baltimore Magazine and starting in 2012 for Baltimore City Paper, and I was falling in love with Baltimore City. And I soon realized that that was the same love that the founders of Beth Am had. They chose to stay here. When members of Chizuk Emunah moved to the county, they chose to stay here in Baltimore City, and that really resonated with me. Beth Am was reinforcing a Jewish framework for exactly the kind of justice-seeking, community-building work that I have come to feel so passionately about. I even revisited some of the books I loved from my Jewish philosophy degree, and in those early days I gave a talk about Martin Buber's I and Thou at Beth Am's Leil Tikkun Shavuot. Buber's teachings on the centrality of dialogue and human connection seemed to be manifest in the holy work that was happening here at Beth Am in those days and today. We became members, and I got more involved with Infor and the Social Action Committee, and in 2017 Rabbi Berg asked if I would join Bonnie Goralnik as co-chair of that committee. I accepted, and over the last 8 years, my work with the Social Action Committee, now called Tzedek Beth Am, and incorporating the work of IFO, has become some of the most meaningful work of my life. I've loved building connections with neighbors, many now friends, throughout Reservoir Hill and West Baltimore, supporting our local high school, which you heard about, now Dorothy I. Height Elementary, helping tenants advocate for rights, doing weekly food giveaways to the community that started during COVID and continue to this day, and welcoming new immigrants to the neighborhood, among lots of other treasured memories. Over the years, I've asked Beth Am leadership to sponsor or co-sponsor dozens of events, actions and protests on everything from racial justice and immigrant rights to youth justice reform, housing justice. They didn't approve all of them, but almost. On Tisha B'Av 2019, fellow Beth Am member Yona Gorelick and I joined a handful of other Maryland Jews to block the entrance to the Howard County Detention Center, which was being used to detain immigrants arrested by ICE. On a hill nearby, among the loudest supporters, leading prayers and chants were Rabbi Berg, Zach Berger, and a crowd of other Beth Am members, which was incredibly affirming for me in that difficult moment. Beth Am has become the Jewish home for me and for my family, and I'm grateful to Rabbi Berg, Rob Tyler, all of the incredible staff, board members, and especially the membership for fostering a really unique Jewish home. Deeply rooted in Jewish values like Ahavta l'reach kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, and tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. Only in a place like Beth Am could I live my values in this deeply Jewish context, and I know that many of my fellow members feel the same way. So happy 50th anniversary to Beth Am. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much to Don, to Jackie, to Evan. Really just uplifting, inspiring, and hopefully motivating speeches that remind us of our core value of Tzedek. Evan was also instrumental in organizing the Lafayette Gilchrist and the New Volcanoes and E.C. Jackson concert that we just had with hundreds of people in this room to celebrate our outward-facing community concert. That was really a terrific event, and it's just so nice to see how both the initiative, the relational work, and these occasional signature events and moments of gathering help to animate our work in our community. If you are passionate about tzedek, about justice, and you're interested in getting more involved in our work, sometime in the future or at Kiddush lunch today, come talk to Evan, come talk to me, come talk to Jackie. We'd really love to hear from you, and we're really excited to continue to do this work together. But for now, we get to